Hello everyone. Before we begin, a small request. If you find this interesting, don't forget to hit like and write a few words below. Your feedback is priceless to me. Your soul is an impregnable fortress which you are obliged to defend not with the force of weapons, but with the power of your own mind, a mind capable of withstanding any onslaught of external reality. In a world where chaos seems the only constant and uncertainty lurks around every corner, the ancient wisdom of Stoicism offers us not merely a refuge, but a veritable arsenal for tempering the spirit. We often believe that our happiness depends on external circumstances, on the favor of fortune, or on the opinions of others. Yet Marcus Aurelius tirelessly reminded us that the quality of our life is determined solely by the quality of our thoughts. To make your mind truly impenetrable, you must grasp one simple but radical truth. The world is not obliged to meet your expectations, and true freedom lies precisely in the abandonment of those expectations. Imagine a person who is not afraid of losing their job, does not fear criticism, and does not fall into despair when their plans collapse. Such a person is not an insensitive rock. On the contrary, they possess the most alive and resilient psyche, because their support is within, not without. This inner state is achieved not through random insight, but through systematic practice, daily exercises of will that transform a fragile ego into adamantine armor. Stoicism teaches us that the only way to find peace is to stop fighting what is beyond our control and to focus all our energy on the only battlefield where we truly have power, our own judgments and reactions. When you encounter rudeness in public transport or an unjust remark from your boss, your first instinctive reaction is anger or resentment. But the Stoic knows that there is a tiny gap between the event and your reaction. A space of freedom where you can choose whether to allow the external impulse to poison your mind or to leave it outside the gates of your fortress. This requires colossal concentration, but the result justifies any effort. You become the master of your own destiny in the deepest sense of the word. We are used to seeking validation of our worth in the eyes of others, in material goods or social status. But these are merely shadows on the cave wall that can vanish at any moment at the whim of chance. True strength lies in the ability to remain unshaken when the familiar order collapses around you. And this serenity stems from the understanding that no one can take away your virtue and your mind, unless you yourself choose to betray them. The lessons of Seneca and Epictetus are more relevant today than ever, because modern humans are overloaded with information and others' expectations, living in a state of constant anxiety about a future that hasn't arrived, and regret for a past that can no longer be changed. Stoic practice invites us to return to the present moment and see it as it is, without embellishment, without unnecessary emotional overlays that only cloud our vision and make us vulnerable in the face of life's adversities. The first and most powerful tool in the Stoic arsenal is the technique of negative visualization, which allows us to prepare for any trial without falling into pessimism. We are accustomed to surrounding ourselves with rosy dreams and making plans based on the best-case scenario. But life rarely follows our blueprints, and when crisis strikes, the unprepared mind breaks under the weight of unexpected blows. The Stoics, by contrast, recommended consciously imagining the darkest outcomes: loss of property, separation from loved ones, exile, or even the end of one's existence in this world.
This may seem like a depressing exercise, but in practice the effect is quite the opposite. When you have already experienced the worst in your imagination and understood that even in that situation you can preserve your dignity and reason, fear of the future begins to dissolve. Imagine that the phone you just bought shatters into pieces, or that your long-awaited vacation is cancelled at the last moment due to unforeseen circumstances. Such events usually provoke a storm of indignation. But if you have already prepared your mind for such an outcome, you will meet it with cool composure
understanding that this is merely a change in the material world that does not touch your inner essence. Moreover, negative visualization makes us more grateful for what we have here and now, because we recognize the fragility and transience of all things. Looking at your child or spouse, consider that they are given to you only for a time, and this awareness will make you cherish every moment together, instead of taking their presence for granted. This approach radically changes our perception of reality, turning daily routine into a gift, and potential catastrophes into expected events that cannot catch us off guard. Seneca advised conducting such mental training regularly, so that the soul is always in a state of combat readiness, like a soldier who trains in peacetime so as not to be bewildered in the heat of battle. We cannot control what cards fate deals us, but we can learn to play any hand in such a way that we preserve inner nobility. From this exercise, true invincibility is born, because for a person prepared for the worst, any setback becomes merely another exercise to strengthen the will. We often fear even thinking about possible losses, believing that thoughts are material or that we invite misfortune. But Stoic wisdom tells us the opposite. It is precisely the avoidance of unpleasant thoughts that makes us their slaves, while boldly looking possible darkness in the face grants us the light of true freedom and unshakable calm in any life situation. The second fundamental pillar of psychological resilience is the dichotomy of control, a concept most fully developed by Epictetus, a former slave who gained freedom of spirit long before receiving physical freedom. The essence of this principle lies in the strict division of all things into two categories: those that are within our power and those that are not. The first category includes only our own judgments, intentions, desires, and aversions. That is, the inner movements of our soul. Everything else, our body, our wealth, reputation, other people's opinions of us, even the results of our own efforts in the material world, lies outside our complete control. The mistake most people make is that they try to control the external, expending colossal mental energy on it, while completely neglecting their inner state. We worry about traffic jams, about the weather, about political events in distant countries, or about someone glancing at us askance. Yet, if you think about it, none of these events are subject to your will. The Stoic, however, tells himself, "I will do everything possible to achieve the goal, but I accept any outcome in advance, because the result does not depend on me alone." Imagine you are preparing for an important job interview. You can study the material perfectly, choose appropriate clothing, and rehearse answers. This is your zone of control. But the employer's decision, the interviewer's mood, or the presence of a more fortunate competitor, these are external factors you cannot directly influence. If you make your happiness depend on getting that job, you doom yourself to suffering in case of failure. But if your goal is simply to present yourself in the best possible way and remain true to your principles throughout the conversation, then you have already won the moment you step through the office door, regardless of the final answer. This shift of focus from outcome to process and to one's own attitude toward events frees us from the burden of anxiety and allows us to act with maximum effectiveness. We cease to be hostages of luck and become architects of our inner world. In daily life, this means that when someone insults you, you recognize that the event is beyond your control, while your reaction to it is entirely within your power. An insult cannot harm you unless you decide to consider it harmful. As Epictetus said, if someone strikes you, it is not yet an injury. It becomes an injury only when you yourself agree to consider yourself injured. Thus, the dichotomy of control transforms us from victims of circumstances into sovereign rulers of our own mind, capable of maintaining equilibrium even at the epicenter of the fiercest storm, because we know exactly where our responsibility ends and the capricious play of the external world begins. The third exercise aimed at hardening the psyche is the practice of voluntary discomfort, which allows us to break the chains of dependency on luxury and comfort, chains that so often make us weak and fearful. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men of his time, advised regularly setting aside several days each month to live in conditions of extreme simplicity. Eat the cheapest and roughest food, wear worn clothing, sleep on a hard surface, and ask yourself, is this what I was so afraid of? In our modern world, where comfort has been elevated to a cult, and even the slightest inconvenience is perceived as a tragedy, this practice takes on special value. We have become so accustomed to soft armchairs, air conditioning, and fast food delivery that the very thought of losing these comforts fills us with panic. However, if you periodically and consciously forgo comfort, you discover that your capacity for happiness does not depend at all on the thickness of your wallet or the temperature of the room. Try taking an ice-cold shower in the morning when you least want to, or forgo using your car in favor of a long walk in the rain, or spend an entire day without your smartphone and the internet. These small acts of voluntary hardship train your will and demonstrate to your mind that you can cope with difficulties without excessive complaining. This is not an act of masochism, but a form of spiritual hygiene that cleanses us of the veneer of softness. When you realize that you can live on bread and water and still maintain clarity of thought and vigor of spirit, you become practically invulnerable to economic crisis or social upheavals. You no longer fear poverty because you have already become acquainted with it and know that it does not deprive you of the main thing, your human nature and your capacity to think. Voluntary discomfort also helps us appreciate the goods we have more deeply, restoring their original value, lost through habituation. After a night on a hard floor, an ordinary bed will feel like a royal couch, and the simple cup of water after a day of fasting will bring more pleasure than the most exquisite delicacy on an ordinary day. This practice teaches us discipline and self-mastery, allowing us to remain calm in situations where others lose their heads over minor inconveniences. The Stoic views his body as a tool that must be ready for labor under any conditions, not as a capricious master demanding constant pampering. By strengthening our ability to endure discomfort, we build a foundation for much deeper psychological resilience, one that will enable us to stand firm when life offers us real trials, not merely imagined ones. We cease to be slaves to our habits and desires, attaining that rare and precious freedom that cannot be bought with money, the freedom to be independent of the vicissitudes of the material world. The fourth important element of Stoic training is the view from above, an exercise that helps us restore the proper scale of things and recognize the insignificance of our personal problems within the context of the whole universe. Often we become so immersed in our daily cares, conflicts, and ambitions that they begin to seem cosmic in magnitude, filling our entire mental horizon and causing excessive stress. Marcus Aurelius frequently employed this technique, imagining himself soaring high above the earth, beholding cities, armies, farmers, marriages, and funerals, watching entire civilizations rise and pass away like waves breaking on the shore. When you look at your life from such a height, your quarrels with colleagues, worries about an unpaid loan, or fear of public condemnation lose their paralyzing power. You see that you are but a tiny point on a vast planet, which itself is a speck of dust in an infinite cosmos, and your time here is only a fleeting moment in the endless stream of eternity. This realization should not lead to a sense of worthlessness in a negative sense. On the contrary, it grants a liberating perspective. It allows us to shed the burden of excessive self-importance and egocentrism, which is the source of most of our suffering. Imagine looking at the night sky studded with stars whose light has traveled millions of years to reach us. Compared to that grandeur, any failure of yours seems like barely a ripple on the ocean surface. The view from above teaches us objectivity and humility, helping us understand that we share a common lot with all humanity and all of nature. We are all part of a single logos, a rational cosmic order, and everything that happens to us is part of this great whole. This exercise is especially useful in moments of anger or intense frustration, when our emotions narrow our perception to the size of a pinhole. If at such a moment you can step back and see the situation through the eyes of history or through the eyes of eternity, your anger will instantly subside, replaced by calm acceptance of the natural course of things. We often spend our lives chasing phantoms that 100 years from now will have no significance whatsoever, and the view from above returns us to what truly matters: our capacity to live according to reason and virtue here and now. This mental expansion of horizons allows us to breathe more freely and look upon the world with the wisdom of an elder, even if we are in the prime of our life. We learn to distinguish the transient from the eternal and the essential from the superficial, making our mind transparent and clear as mountain air, free from the fog of petty passions and unfounded anxieties about our reputation or material well-being in this fleeting theater of shadows. The fifth practice, which turns obstacles into opportunities, is known as Amor Fati, or love of one's fate. This is not merely passive acceptance of what happens, but an active and joyful endorsement of everything life brings, be it triumph or defeat. Marcus Aurelius used the metaphor of fire, which consumes whatever is thrown upon it and thereby blazes even brighter. In the same way, the Stoic mind should turn every obstacle into fuel for its own growth. We often expend enormous energy on complaints and the question, why did this happen to me? Trying to argue with a reality that has already occurred.
But for the Stoic, such resistance seems pointless and even insane, akin to a dog tied to a cart that can either run along willingly, enjoying the walk, or be dragged by force while protesting every turn. Amor Fati calls us not merely to endure hardships, but to love them as a necessary part of our path, as training assigned by the best of teachers, nature itself. If you fail at a project, it is not a catastrophe, but a chance to analyze your mistakes and become wiser. If you encounter illness, it is an opportunity to display courage and patience. In every event, even the most painful, a seed of benefit is hidden, and it is our duty to find it and nurture it. Imagine you are standing in a long queue. Instead of becoming irritated, you use the time for meditation or people watching, turning a tedious wait into a valuable experience. This approach makes us absolutely invincible, because there is no event that could break us. Everything that happens turns to our advantage if we know how to use it properly. We stop dividing events into good and bad, realizing that these labels are our own impositions, while nature simply follows its own laws. Love of fate frees us from the role of victim and gives us the power of an alchemist who can turn the lead of daily difficulties into the gold of spiritual experience. This requires deep trust in the cosmos and an understanding that we are part of something far greater than our ego. When you accept your fate wholly, with all its thorns and briars, you gain an incredible lightness of being, because you no longer have to fight the current of life. You swim with it, using the power of the stream to reach your goals. And even if the stream carries you toward the end of your path, you meet it with a smile, knowing you have played your part in the great symphony of the cosmos.
This practice uproots the cause of anxiety, for if you love everything that happens, you have nothing to fear. You become a co-participant in divine providence, and your will merges with the will of the universe itself, making you invulnerable to any external blows of fate. The sixth exercise is aimed at purifying our perception from subjective judgments, and is called objective description, or descriptio. We often suffer not from things themselves, but from the epithets and labels we attach to them in our minds. When we say this is a terrible catastrophe, or this is an unbearable insult, we create our own pain, adding an excessive layer of emotion to the facts of reality. Marcus Aurelius taught us to separate the event from our judgment of it, describing things in their simplest, almost biological or physical form. For example, fine wine is merely fermented grape juice. luxurious purple clothing, is just sheep's wool soaked in mollusk blood. A prestigious position is simply a set of social conventions and obligations. If we apply this method to our problems, they begin to lose their frightening power over us. An insult from another person is merely a set of sound waves emanating from their larynx, or symbols on a screen that have no physical power to harm you. The loss of money is just a change of digits in a bank account, or the transfer of pieces of paper from one hand to another. Looking at the world with such naked vision, we see its mechanics without the dramatic coloring imposed by our ego. This helps us maintain mental sobriety in situations where others succumb to panic or excitement. Imagine you are in the midst of a noisy conflict. Instead of becoming emotionally involved, you begin to observe it like an entomologist. Here one person raises their voice. There another's breathing quickens. Certain phrases are spoken. Such detached observation allows you to act rationally and effectively, without letting others' emotions dictate your behavior.
Objective description does not mean coldness or indifference. It means honesty with oneself and with reality. We stop being slaves to metaphors and hyperboles that inflate our minor troubles into universal dramas. This exercise returns to us control over our attention, which is our most valuable resource. When we see things as they truly are, without embellishment and without demonization, we can interact with them much more successfully. We understand that most things in the world are neutral in themselves, and only our mind imparts a taste of bitterness or sweetness to them. By learning to strip these masks from reality, we attain the clarity of vision necessary for making wise decisions and preserving inner peace in any, even the most chaotic environment, turning our mind into a pure lens that transmits the light of truth without distorting it through the shadows of our fears and desires. The seventh and final exercise is the daily evening review, a practice recommended by nearly all the great Stoics, including Seneca and Epictetus. At the end of each day, when the bustle subsides, we must set aside time for an honest conversation with ourselves, reviewing our actions, thoughts, and reactions over the past hours. This should not become a session of self-flagellation. Rather, it should resemble the report of a judge who impartially assesses whether one's actions aligned with one's principles. What mistakes did I make today? Where did I succumb to anger or greed? At what moment did I forget the dichotomy of control and start worrying about external things? And more importantly, how can I do better tomorrow? This practice allows us to learn from our own experience and continually improve our character, turning each day into a lesson in wisdom. Without such analysis, we risk repeating the same errors year after year, living on autopilot and obeying habitual impulses. Evening reflection helps us recognize the moments when we remain true to ourselves, giving us a strength to continue on the path. Imagine keeping a journal in which you record not simply the day's events, but your inner states. It becomes a personal map of your spiritual development. Seneca wrote that after such self-examination, sleep becomes especially deep and peaceful, because the soul knows it has been examined and purified. We learn to be both a strict mentor and an understanding friend to ourselves. This exercise also helps us prepare for the next day, mapping out in advance the virtues we wish to embody. If you know that a difficult conversation awaits you tomorrow, you can preset your mind to calmness and objectivity, drawing on the insights from today's analysis. Gradually, this habit makes us more mindful in every moment. We begin to notice our negative reactions as they arise and are able to stop them before they seize control of our mind. The evening review is the bridge between the theory of Stoicism and its practical application in life. It is a moment of truth when we shed all social masks and stand before ourselves in our authentic nakedness. Here is where that impenetrable psyche is forged, because resilience is born from deep self-knowledge and constant work on one's weaknesses.
we realize that each day is a little life, and how we live this segment determines the quality of our entire existence. Falling asleep with a clear conscience and a clear understanding of our path, we grow stronger and ready to greet the new dawn with an open heart and an unyielding will, knowing that we have done everything possible to be worthy of the name of a rational being in this complex and beautiful world. Applying these 7 exercises in your daily life, you will notice how your perception of stress and difficulties, which once seemed insurmountable, begins to change. The modern world, with its endless stream of notifications, deadlines, and social comparisons, constantly tries to knock us off balance, but Stoic tempering gives us the ability to remain at the center of our own calm. Imagine a worker who faces equipment breakdowns and grumbling colleagues every day, or a parent trying to balance work and child rearing amid a shortage of time. Without a Stoic foundation, such people quickly burn out. Their minds become like a disturbed beehive, every thought full of anxiety. But the Stoic, in the very same circumstances, sees a field for training. A machine breaking down is an exercise in patience. A colleague's grumbling is a test of whether he can take others' opinions to heart. We begin to understand that mental discipline is not a heavy burden, but the greatest gift we can give ourselves. It enables us not to react impulsively to news in social media feeds or to fluctuations in exchange rates, because we know that our inner well-being is not measured by such indicators. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what we can give to the world rather than on what we can get from it, and this shift in paradigm removes the very ground for disappointment. We become more reliable friends, more effective workers, and more harmonious individuals, because our behavior no longer depends on the whims of mood or external stimuli. The wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, who governed a vast empire while finding time for deep inner work, proves to us that no external responsibilities can serve as an excuse for mental chaos. The greater our responsibilities, the more important it is to possess this inner fortress where we can restore our strength and clarity of vision. Ultimately, the practice of Stoicism is a path toward true humanity, toward the realization of our highest potential as rational beings capable of rising above animal instincts of fear and aggression. We learn to live in accordance with nature, accepting its laws and finding beauty in its order, even when it seems harsh to us. This path requires courage to face the truth about ourselves and the world, but it also bestows upon us an unshakable peace that cannot be found in any material achievements or pleasures. For this peace is the fruit of our own will and our unremitting striving for truth and virtue, which remain with us until the very last moment of our earthly journey. In concluding this deep immersion into Stoic practice, it is important to recognize that the path to an impenetrable mind is not a final destination, but an endless process of self-improvement that continues until the very end. We must remember that even the great teachers of Stoicism did not consider themselves perfected sages. They were eternal students who each morning anew chose the path of virtue. The end of the path, or the completion of our existence, should not be perceived as something terrible to be avoided even in thought. On the contrary, for the Stoic, it is the final chord that gives meaning to the entire preceding melody. The awareness that our time is finite should not plunge us into despondency. Instead, it should serve as the most powerful incentive to live as consciously and fully as possible here and now, without postponing virtue for later. We do not know how much time we are allotted, but it is within our power to decide how we use the moments we have. Will we squander them on empty grievances and petty worries, or will we devote them to developing our spirit and helping others? Each of your breaths is a gift of nature, and each of your decisions is a stroke on the canvas of your life. Stoicism provides us with the tools to make this canvas a masterpiece of courage and clarity. May your mind become like a rock against which the waves of a raging ocean break, remaining motionless and majestic, no matter what storm rages around you.
Remember that true freedom is the absence of dependence on external things and the ability to always remain true to your inner voice of reason. When you attain this state, you will discover that the world around you has not changed, but you have, and that is enough to transform your entire reality. You will no longer seek salvation outside yourself, because the source of eternal peace and inexhaustible strength has always been and will always be within you. Practice these lessons daily, make them part of your very breath, and then no force in the universe will be able to rob you of your dignity and your inner joy. Be ready for the end at any moment, but until that moment arrives, live in such a way that your presence in this world is a light for others and a testimony to the greatness of the human spirit. A spirit capable of overcoming any obstacle and remaining unconquered in its fidelity to truth, wisdom, and love for that order of things we call life, accepting it in all its diversity and in the inevitability of its great finale, beyond which lies only silence and a return to the bosom of boundless nature, from which we once emerged to briefly glimpse the beauty of all that is. Write in the comments, "I am a Stoic," as our sign for those who have made it to the end and grasped the essence. If this resonance has touched you, share it with someone who might need it. Remember, the most important battle and the greatest victory always happens within.